রিন্দন আছো?
হ্যাঁ আছি কুণাল দা।
ওকে, I'm sorry. Thanks to the clashing of the election times, and even if
Yeah.
others don't, that I am involved in this, so I haven't been able to do much uh,
Yeah,
regarding
so
the CLI conference.
okay. That's okay, sir. Tiash is hosting the meeting today.
Okay. আচ্ছা, আমি তাহলে আমার since a lot of people will come in, the best thing I suppose is to turn off the camera until the program starts and
Yeah.
just briefly turn it on when I introduce Tapati.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Okay,
কুণাল দা।
ঠিক আছে, thank you. It was 9 o'clock, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. কিন্তু
Okay.
nobody has joined, I don't know.
হ্যাঁ, মানে একটা general chaos. I thought, but I wasn't in the EC meeting, that 9 o'clock
Tapati
was.
has joined.
Tapati has joined sharp at
Yes,
9,
I have
but
joined.
9 o'clock I
রিন্দন,
thought
কুনাল
was.
আমি জয়েন করেছি।
হ্যাঁ, আপনি করেছেন আর আমি করেছি। হ্যাঁ, কিন্তু মানে তো সেই একটু শ্রোতারা আর একটু আসবে তো। Dr. Bhushan, when should we, how much can I wait?
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Hello.
Yes.
Good morning, sir. I think we should be starting because time given is 9 a.m. But again, it's as you said, it's a general chaos. So maybe we can wait for 2 to 3 minutes more and then we can
Okay.
start.
Please brief me. How long do I give Tapati to speak?
So the session is for 1 hour.
Okay.
So
Session is for 1 hour, so fine.
we can plan accordingly.
Yeah. Okay, when my clock, which is now saying 2 minutes past 9, turns to 5 minutes past in my clock, I'll start. Tapodidi, 2-3 মিনিট আরো একটু ওয়েট করছি রিন্দন এন্ড ডক্টর ভূষণ ছাড়াও আরো একটু শ্রোতা আসার জন্য। The session you chaired must have been much better.
Probably people are not interested.
Dr. Linden, please
Nah,
ask.
it's 9 o'clock in the morning, Tapodidi. Particularly younger people, রিন্দন এখন একটু ওল্ডার হয়েছে, ইউনিভার্সিটিতে চাকরি করছে, but I find that my students don't even get up before 10 in the morning. If I call them at 9, they start yawning in the phone. Okay, so we have got.
Go to bed in wee hours of night.
Yes, of
They
course. I
cannot
mean,
get up.
they make WhatsApp and Facebook posts till 3 in the morning.
Exactly. So how they can get up at 9? It is quite in the fitness of things that they will get up at 10 or even later.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so 1 more minute and I'll start the session, Dr. Bhushan.
Sure, sir. Dr.
Okay.
Linden, I'll request you to please ask Mr. Ghosh to take over and introduce the chair.
Okay, sir.
Please ask
I'm
Mr.
asking Tiash to come here today.
Yeah, please. They need to introduce the chair.
For the
Yash and Dattatreya, we will be comparing both the main session, the parallel sessions. Huh? I have already sent the bio notes.
Okay, we'll start now. So please, I see that CM has come in. Now we can definitely start.
Yash, you will introduce Kunalda.
Yes, sure. So I'll just introduce Kunalda and then Kunalda will take over and introduce Tapatiti and we start.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Good
Kunal,
morning. Okay. Yes. Please carry on.
Kunal Chattopadhyay is Professor of Comparative Literature, former Professor of History and former Head Department of Comparative Literature, Jadavpur University. He is a former coordinator, Center for European Studies, Jadavpur University, and at present he is the coordinator of the Center for Studies in African Literatures and Cultures, Jadavpur University. He is the author, editor, translator of around 18 books, which include Tibhaga Andoloner Itihash, প্রাচীন গ্রিসের সমাজ ও সংস্কৃতি co-authored with সুজাতা ভদ্র, Progressive Publishers 1988, ফার্সি বিপ্লব, ইতিহাস দিগন্ত edited translation with Kumar Marik, of T.A.'s Action edited 10 essays on the French Revolution, K.P. Bagchi and co. 1989. Perspectives on Marxism with Vishwajit Chatterjee, Center for Marxian Studies, JU. A hegemony achieved the identity of European in the second millennium AD with Rila Mukherjee, a Center for European Studies publication. The Marxism of Leon Trotsky, Progressive 2006. Leon Trotsky, Writings in Exile with Paul LeBlanc, Pluto Press 2012. He has also published around 100 papers, including in recent years about a dozen on socialism and Indian literatures. Kunalda, over to you and mute myself.
Okay, thank you. And welcome to the first plenary session of the second day of the first online Comparative Literature Association of India conference. We would, of course, have preferred meeting each other physically, but since this was not possible, we now have a session where this is a plenary session where the speaker is Professor Tapati Mukherjee. She is currently the Vice President of Comparative Literature Association of India. She is a well-known scholar, an outstanding scholar of Sanskrit and comparative literature, as well as a highly competent administrator. She has been acclaimed as a topper in Sanskrit in the master's course in Calcutta University. She was the principal of Vijay Krishna Girls College, Howrah in 2002. In 2008, she joined Rabindra Bharati University as registrar, and she was the founder vice chancellor of Sidho Kanho Birsa University in Purulia. In 2012, she joined Vishwabharati as director, culture and cultural relations, and principal, Rabindra Bhavan. And at present, I've got a sound problem coming. Excuse. লাইনটাই স্টাক হয়ে গেল।
No, we can hear you, Kunalda. Oh, it left us.
কজন আছে? ছয়। মানে পাঁচজন।
Hi, Kunalda's computer has got stuck or something like that. He'll take about 2-3 minutes to join again.
Okay.
Hello, good morning. Good
Good
morning,
morning.
Taptini.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. You are looking glamorous today.
Thank you. Thank you. I am pretty old now. So how can I look glamorous,
but
my
that
dear?
but that doesn't matter. Pretty is always pretty. Okay, okay.
Thank you. Professor Chandramohan is smiling at your comment. Pretty is always pretty.
Yes, that is true. Is it not? Well, this is whether age doesn't matter.
If you are young in mind, then age really doesn't matter.
Yes. If mentally one is young, it
Hmm.
there is no concept of old age, isn't it?
Yes. I
And all
fully
these
agree with you. Hmm.
and Taptiri, all these ventures keep us going, So in a way, this is quite energizing
Hmm.
to participate in all that. So
And,
yesterday it
at,
was good. The entire
and,
all this.
and at the same time, to be in company with younger generation energizes you.
Yes, that is very
And,
important. But that
uh,
I always say because we are the teachers and we are always interacting with the
students. Hmm.
younger generation. So that keeps us energetic and also young
Yeah,
mentally.
exactly.
There's still time to for the session to start, isn't it?
Now, session has started, but chairperson Kunal's computer has got somehow struck, so we are
Okay, okay.
waiting for him to join.
Yeah, I understand because, anyways, yesterday everything went smoothly, very smoothly.
Hmm.
The first day, 15th and all, it was very good. No
Yes, Kunal
encounter.
has joined, I think.
Yes, okay, that is good.
I'm sorry for this
Okay,
mishap.
good
So,
morning. Good
good
morning,
morning.
Kunalba.
So, I am sorry, I about finished introducing Tapotidi when my computer went off. So, this is to request Tapotidi without any wasting any further time to present her paper. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Kunal Babu, for your generous introduction. And at the same time, I take this opportunity to convey my sincerest thanks and gratitude to all organizers of this international conference for offering me an opportunity to present, to speak on a very pertinent topic which is rather neglected nowadays in academic circle. That is Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi. At the beginning, I just told Kunal that most probably people are oblivious of Rumi, and that is the reason we have so uh, a thin audience right now. Anyway, the paper which I am going to present before you, the topic of that paper is Poetics of Confluence Transcending Spatio-Temporal temporal barrier, Jalaluddin Rumi and Rabindranath Tagore. The word Sahitya, one of the synonyms of literature, has been derived from Sahita, which means accompaniment or conjunction. Needless to say that Sahitya literature has its root embedded in life. As human life passes on like a flowing stream, occasionally impeded but but finally undeterred by any barrier of geographical, spatial, or temporal intervention, literature too has its appreciative readers in various ages, defying the frown of time or place constraint. This is due to the immortality and all pervasiveness of literature that not only does its that not only does it cast its impact on readers of later generations, but at the same time it is reinterpreted and recast befitting the demand of the century. At the same time, there might not be direct contact between two illustrious authors belonging to two different ages, cut off by various centuries and belonging to different backgrounds. But a strange affinity of thought emerging from love for the humanity or a similar philosophical approach signaling identification with the infinite. I repeat, signaling identification with the infinite marks two authors irrespective of their age, country, and other individual features. I make this introduction because of the fact that such affinity of thought can be traced in the works of two great poets, Jalaluddin Rumi, the Persian poet of 13th century and an ardent votary of Sufism, and Rabindranath Tagore, the first Asian Nobel laureate of 19th century Bengal and a Brahmo by faith. We can easily understand the gap of centuries which differentiate these two authors from one another. It is indeed unfortunate that Rumi is not much discussed in our academic circle, despite his outstanding brilliance as a poet, having affinity, strange affinity, with the doctrine of Upanishads, propagating identity with the infinite. Rumi was born, let me give a brief glimpse of Rumi so that we can have access to him properly. Rumi was born in Persian province of Khorasan in AD 1207. At that time, Persian Empire court extended from the Ural Mountains to the Persian Gulf and from the Indus almost to the Euphrates, as E.G. Brown described it. Rumi's family traveled to Damascus and finally settled in Rome, Turkey. He, along with his family, again shifted to Konya, and there he came in contact with Burhanuddin Muhakkak and was influenced by Sufism, which believed in absolute union with the Supreme Self. In 1240, he assumed the rank of Siyak and formed a group of disciples who were ardent believers in the concept of ultimate union with the God. Thereafter, Rumi was absorbed in the belief of absolute identity with God, who is not only omnipotent but imbued in every soul. This concept of oneness with God, which resembles our Upanishadic thought of Yo asau asau purusha soham asmi. I am the supreme self. I am one identified with the supreme, resonates in the poems of Rumi. This is rather astounding that Upanishadic thought, we find resonance of these thoughts in Rumi's poems. The remaining part of Rumi's life was marked by his close association with Tabriz, whom he considered as divine beloved, and subsequent ultimacy with another his disciple, Hassan ibn Toki, Turk, whose name Rumi had associated with his most illustrious work, Masnavi, by calling it the Book of Hassan. In view of the fact that Rumi was considered as one of the most ardent believers of Sufism, a few lines about Sufism I think will be appropriate to mention here. Sufism is a mystical part of Islam and believes in absolute communion with the Supreme. It despises any artificial barrier among men and is thoroughly averse against materialism. It has 4 degrees: Sariyat, the law; Tariqat, the technique; Marifat, the divine knowledge; and Hakikat, the reality. At the stage of Hakikat, a man becomes one with Mansur, who said, I quote, "To see me is to see him, and to see him is to see me," unquote. This concept, I repeat, this concept of absolute communion with the supreme divinity finds its resonance in our Ishopanishad also. Just sarvani bhutani atmanevanu pashyati sarva bhuteshu chatmanang tato no bijugupsati. One who finds himself imbued in the entire world and at the same time finds himself in the world. One who finds himself imbued in the entire world and at the same time finds entire world imbued in him, he does not despise anybody. As a matter of fact, the concept of communion with supreme divinity is embedded in Indian philosophical thought, or to be more precise, in the Indian psyche itself, which found its reflection in Upanishads, Vedanta, Sufism, and many other mystical representations, followed by various sects like Bauls. I will refer to Bauls. I will discuss about the Bauls later. Now, Rumi has been credited with the authorship of a huge number of mystical compositions. 1. Diwani Samsit Tabriz, 2,500 odes. Masnavi in 6 books of about 25,000 rhyming couplets. Third, Rubaiyat or quatrains, 1600, treated as authentic. Rumi's poetry is marked. What are the basic features of Rumi's poetry? Rumi's poetry is marked by unconditional surrender to the supreme divinity. The simple language and portrayal of day-to-day incidents of life, and above all, the ultimate longing of a mystic make the poems vibrant. The way he finds ways to surrender to the ultimate infinity make the poems more poignant. And while Diwan and Rubaiyat are personal and emotional in appeal, Masnavi records the outpour of a mystic Rumi's passion to be to be cemented, to be united, records the outpour of a mystic Rumi's passion to be united with his beloved, the God incarnate. I quote from Rumi: "There is a veil separating the lover from the beloved. There is a veil separating the lover from the beloved. Don't you like that veil be lifted? Don't you like that veil be lifted? And my light merges into the divine light." I unquote. Now I come to the main first area of my paper, the affinity which can be traced in the works of Rumi and Rabindranath. There is a strange affinity of thought and emotion traced in the poems of Rabindranath, separated from Rumi by a gap of centuries and appearing in an absolutely different scenario, that is 19th century Bengal. One should not go to trace, we should not go to trace line by line similarity in the poems of these two stalwarts, nor are we definite about whether Rabindranath ever read Rumi's poems. In the Rabindra Bhavan archive in Vishwabharati, where personal collections of Rabindranath are kept, we do not, I searched, but we do not come across any book of Rumi. In spite of it, affinity in thought and expression of these two can hardly be overestimated. It is also a matter on record that even after conferment of Nobel on Rabindranath in 1913, he was mostly known in Europe as a mystic poet. Whether it is true or not, I will come later, but he was designated, he was described as a mystic poet in Europe. Now to trace, we have to trace the source of the affinity. How come this affinity originated? One has to look back at the family background and upbringing of Rabindranath. Born in a family which had played a pivotal role in 19th century Bengal Renaissance and nurtured, this is very important, I draw your attention to this very pertinent point, and nurtured under the loving care of Father Devendranath, a pioneer of awakening in Bengal, and founder of Brahmo dispensation, which was based on Upanishadic thoughts and Vedanta. Rabindranath was well acquainted with both Oriental wisdom embedded in Indian philosophical texts like Upanishads and Western enlightenment. Devendranath was well versed in Persian and often recited from Hafiz, his favorite poet, as is evident from his own autobiography and also from the memoir of Saudamini Devi, eldest sister of Rabindranath. Rabindranath fondly cherished this memory during his interview in Persia with the editor of Isfahan, a newspaper. I quote from Tagore: "You know, I had my first introduction to Hafiz through my father, who used to recite his verses to me. They seemed to me like a greeting from a faraway poet who was yet near to me." Unquote. This nearness which you found in Hafiz is expressed in his poems, though he was not acquainted with Rumi in the strict sense of the term. Furthermore, despite his relationship with Europe since adolescence, cemented with admiration for its advanced evocation of modern knowledge, Tagore always felt a strong bond of affinity with Asia. He strongly believed that Asia will guide the world towards peace and universal fraternity in years to come. It was for this reason that he traveled to Iran despite his old age and failing health in 1932. In his travelogue, Paroshe, that is Journey to Persia, he fondly referred to his affinity with the Persian mystic poets. I quote, এখানে একটা জনশ্রুতি রটেছে যে পারসিক মরমিয়া কবিদের রচনার সঙ্গে আমার লেখার আছে সাজত্য, আছে সাজাত্য. A rumor is here, there is a rumor in this country that I have some semblance with Persian sensitive poets in my works, in my compositions. It was for this sense of solidarity that the tomb of Hafiz elicited spontaneous admiration of the poet. He wrote 2 poems also describing his appreciation of Iran. I quote, I carry in my heart a golden lamp of remembrance of an illumination that is past. I kept it bright against the tarnishing touch of time. There is a fire of a new magnanimous life. Allow it, my brother, to kiss my lamp with its flame. Another point which should not be lost sight of in this discussion is Tagore's acquaintance with both Sufism and Bhakti movement. He had translated 100 poems of Kabir. His poem on Ramananda denouncing casteism shows his affinity with Bhakti movement, which swept medieval India and had a profound impact on Indian milieu. In several poems, Shuchi, Dhula Mandir, etc., he has denounced untouchability, casteism, and contempt towards the so-called downtrodden, a redeeming feature of both Sufism and Bhakti movement. Granted that Tagore might not have direct access to the poems of Rumi, but the fountain source of inspiration in Rumi's poems, that is mysticism and surrender to the supreme soul, acted as one of the principal themes in Tagore's poem, thus substantiating a poetics of confluence of 2 sensitive minds. To substantiate my point, let me quote, let me show you the affinity between Rumi and Rabindranath. First, Rumi. Name of the poem is The Song of the Reed. Reed means that is lyre. I quote, the secret, this is from Rumi, Matnavi 1. The secret of my song, though near, none can see and none can hear. The secret of my song, though near, none can see and none can hear. Oh, for a friend to know the sign and mingle all his soul with mine. Oh, for a friend to know the sign and mingle all his soul with mine. This is from Matnavi. Now come to Song Offerings, a poem that is Gitanjali 70, Song Offerings 2 and Bangla Gitanjali 78, written on 27th of Joishto 1317, that is 1924. This is from Song Offerings. I know thou takest pleasure in my singing. I know that thou takest pleasure in my singing. I know that only as a singer I come before thy presence. I touch by the edge of the far spreading wing of my song the feet which I could never aspire to reach. I touch by the edge of the far spreading wing of my song thy feet, which I could never aspire to reach. Drunk with the joy of singing, I forget myself, my call, the friend who art my Lord. Drunk with the joy of singing, I forget myself, the friend who art my Lord. Unquote. The friend with whom Rumi cherished a communion has been described by Rabindranath as friend and my Lord. This friend, quote unquote, has been elsewhere by Rabindranath as the guiding force of his life and has been called Jibon Devata, divinity incarnate in life. I quote from Bangla Rabindranath. First, then I will translate it. এই যে কবি যিনি আমার সমস্ত ভালো মন্দ, আমার সমস্ত অনুকূল ও প্রতিকূল উপকরণ লইয়া আমার জীবনকে রচনা করিয়া চলিয়াছেন, তাহাকেই আমার কাব্যে আমি জীবন দেবতা নাম দিয়াছি। The poet who is creating my life with its noble and evil aspects, with its favorable and unfavorable elements. The same poet has been described by me in my poems as divinity incarnate of my life. A description of mystic union of the individual with the supreme self, which finds its nicest expression in the poems of Rumi, resonates in the imagination of Tagore too. I quote from Rumi, name of the poem, The Marriage of the Minds. Thou and I, individuals no more, will be mingled in ecstasy, joyful and secure from foolish babble, thou and I. All the bright-plumed birds of heaven will deliver their hearts with envy in the place where we shall laugh in such a fashion, thou and I. You will get a reflection of this thought in Song Offerings 34, Gitanjali 138. This poem is written on 15th of Sravan, 1307 BS. Let only that little be left of me, whereby I may name thee my all. Let only that little be left of my wheel, whereby I may feel thee on every side and come to thee in everything, and offer to thee my love every moment, and offer to thee my love every moment. Unquote. In another poem, Rumi described how all I and thou, within quote unquote, I and thou submerges in the beloved. Thou didn't continue this I and we in order that thou mightest plan the game of worship with thyself, that all I's and thou's should become one soul, that all I's and thou's should become one soul, and at least should be submerged in the beloved, and at least should be submerged in the beloved. An identical statement finds eloquent expression in Song Offering 56, Gitanjali 121, composed on 28th of Ashar, 1317 BS. Thou hast taken me as thy partner. Of all this wealth, thou hast taken me as thy partner of all this wealth. In my heart is the endless play of thy delight. In my heart is the endless play of thy delight. In my life, thy will is ever taking shape. In my life, thy will is ever taking shape. And for this, thou who art the King of things has decked thyself in beauty to captivate my heart. And for this, thy love loses itself in the love of thy lover, and there art thou seen in the peaceful union of two, unquote. The affinity is quite discernible. Another mystic philosophy which stirred Tagore to the core of his heart was Baul. The songs of Bauls, delving deep into a portrayal of communion with the Supreme Soul, made a profound impact on Tagore, who had referred to them in his famous book, Religion of Man. I quote from Rabindranath: "The Bauls are an ancient group of wandering minstrels from Bengal who believe in simplicity in life and love. They are similar to the Buddhists in their belief as a fulfillment which is reached by love's emancipating us from the dominance of self. The quest, unquote, the quest for Moner Manush, or man of my heart, resonates in Baul songs which caught the imagination of Tagore. As such, we come across an assimilation of mystic thoughts represented by Rumi, Sufism, Bhakti, and lastly Baul, which found their most touching expressions in Tagore's poem. It may be noted in this context, this is rather interesting, that Evelyn Underhill, in her review of Gitanjali song offerings in the weekly journal The Nation. The name of the journal is Nation, and Evelyn Underhill is making a review of Gitanjali song offerings when it was published by India Society of London in 1912. In this review, this reviewer, this lady, placed Rabindranath in the same bracket with Rumi as a mystic poet. She felt that the supreme quality to be a seer supreme, essential in mystic poetry of the highest order, was evident alike in the writings of the East and West. Supreme quality to be a seer supreme, essential in a mystic poetry of the highest order, was evident alike in the writings of the East and the West. She said, in the Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi, in the Saint John of the Cross, and to this illustrious list was added the name of Rabindranath Tagore. It is a fact that the mystic poet name led to Tagore's erosion of fame in the West, but that did not in any way mar his poetic brilliance. Both Rumi and Tagore, though separated by a time gap of centuries, were unrivaled in their own dispensation. Both were considered as messiah to the suffering masses for their humanism, idea of love and fraternity for the weakest and the tormented, and their lofty ideal of surrender to the Almighty. The parables and fables used by Rumi for propagation of doctrine of love and humanism resemble, this is another very interesting aspect, but which I could not touch upon due to shortage of time, that is the parables and fables which were used by Rumi for propagation of doctrine of love and humanism resemble our Panchatantra stories of Sanskrit literature. Rumi's poems, which vibrate with ethereal beauty, had formed their resonance. I have shown you in Tagore's poems. How Tagore derived his mystic faith from his predecessors and shaped it into a form is universalism had been explained by a very illustrious person, Harold Hageney. Who is he? He was president of the Nobel Committee, which conferred the most coveted Nobel on Tagore. Now this Harold Hageney, president of the Nobel Committee, in his speech at the time of conferment of Nobel on Tagore, said, I am afraid this is a long quote, but since this helps one to understand Tagore in his proper perspective, I would like to quote it. This is mysticism, if we like to call it so, but not a mysticism that relinquishing personality seeks to become in an all that approaches a nothingness. That is not mysticism. But then what is mysticism? But one that with all the talents and faculties of the soul trained to their highest pitch eagerly sets forth to meet the living Father of all creation. This strenuous type of mysticism was not wholly unknown even in India before the days of Tagore. We are accustomed to it. There are so many forms of mysticism. Hardly indeed among the ascetics and philosophers of ancient times, but rather in the many forms of bhakti, a piety whose very essence is the profound love and reliance upon God. Even though Tagore may have borrowed one or another note from the ancestral or from the orchestral symphonies of his native predecessors, even though Tagore may have borrowed one or another note from the orchestral symphonies of his native predecessors, yet he treads upon finer ground in this age that draws the people of this art closer together along paths of peace and of strife to joint and collaborative responsibilities, and that spends its own energies in dispatching greetings and good wishes far over land and sea, unquote. So Tagore had assimilated the ideas of those great, including Rumi, to create an uniqueness in his poem unrivaled in world literature. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee. We have about 12-13 minutes time. So the paper is now open for comments, discussions.
Hello.
Hello, Sieghild.
Hello. Good morning.
Yes.
So
For you, this must be really early.
Yes, it is.
So you could manage to come. Thank you, madam.
Yes, you began even earlier than I thought, but I got it. So it was extremely interesting, your paper, and I thank you very much because it is astonishing how um, uh, des esprits can meet. And I remember in Germany we have about the 12th, about Rumi time, a mystic who is Meister Eckhart. And he is, let's say, not influenced, but he has read Rumi also. But it was at the same time. And now I wonder whether mysticism is not something like a universal for minds, for human minds, because they meet themselves in this transport, and in this transport to transcendence. And because Meister Eckhart put up all a theory about transcendence, you have to lose yourself and to go to the other, and lose yourself and to become one. And that's exactly what happens to Tagore. So I wonder whether it is not a universal, this desire of transcendence. Yeah. It's a commentary, it's a question, as you like.
Yes, thank you, Professor Womil. Yes, this desire to transcend one's own self and be one with the infinite is almost an universal feature we find in our saints, our poets like Tagore or Rumi. This is a feature which is almost prevalent in almost all these poets. But the most important thing in Rumi, which I could not discuss, but I just touched upon, is that he used not only these poems, but also many parables and fables to propagate his ideas. And those resemble in a very peculiar manner, I should say, our Panchatantra stories, which were also a medium of expression, which were also a medium of instruction to young students. And there also these type of teachings have been incorporated to impress upon young mind about the efficacy of oneness, of surrender to the infinite. That is always there. So these two are separated by a gap of centuries, what I wanted to emphasize. But at the same time, they have a strange affinity of thought because of their predilections of God, of supreme divinity, and they have their strange affinity. And Tagore has imbibed so many things from so many persons, but he has the power, he has the capability to assimilate them in an orchestra where every tone retains its music, but at the same time it becomes part and parcel of the orchestra. That is Tagore, and that is the reason he is unsurpassed, he is unrivaled in not only in Indian literature, but in world literature as well, even today.
Yeah. Just as a small commentary on Meister Eckhart, as it was the Christian time, he nearly was persecuted for his intention to become godlike, something like that. So that is to say, to live and transcend his own ego in order to become nearer to God. And Christian Catholic religion didn't like that at all, and he nearly was persecuted.
Absolutely, yes. It is there because, but there are other political factors also. Europe did not like Tagore's repudiation of knighthood as a repercussion of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre.
Yes.
Even his very dear friends like Yeats, etc., were not in good terms with Tagore. The Europe could not take this knighthood desertion in a good mood, I should say. And that was also a reason he has been described as a mystic poet, and his popularity after the publication of Gardener began to erode throughout Europe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tapti ji, Tapti ji, this is Chandra Mohan.
Yes, I understand.
Now I would really, the way your impressive research has weaved together the two personalities to a level which I describe as cosmic, divine, universal, of course, is very true. But at the same time, their artistic expression also comes very total and ultimately coming to that level through the divinity, that part. But I admire the way you have put together all these things so nicely and so integrally, for which I would like to congratulate you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wants this some time? Please unmute yourself. If you're speaking, please unmute yourself, and if you have any comments or questions.
Tabri, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
The question is related to intuition and expression. Now, in Tagore, it is supreme. Whatever he intuits, he expresses in a various field. I have seen him expressing the beauty, the art, and also the truth and all that. In Rumi, of course, artistic expression is there, but do you think it comes at intuition level?
Since Tagore has assimilated various inspirations in his life, and he could make out of them concrete thing that is absent in Rumi. Rumi is rather, as you mentioned, is rather led by intuition, because in his age, it is not expected also that flourishing of poetic technique, etc., will come out. But he is more guided by his intuition because of his love of God, because of his unconditional surrender, etc., etc. But whereas Tagore is more cemented, more decked, furnished with poetic techniques, with poetic beauty, I should say.
Yes, very true. Very, very true. Thank you. So, Anjum? There is Anjum. Yes, sir, the chairperson.
Okay, well, I would, if there's no one else to ask any questions, I had a problem, which is why I am not going into much commentary. As you know, my line was constantly going defunct, so I was coming in, going out, couldn't hear the entire presentation with the kind of concentration it required. But I was wondering, unless Tapatidi has already mentioned it, because Rabindranath mentions Hafiz much more than he mentions Rumi. The transmission was there. How far was there a direct transmission, and if it happened, how far was it through the Indian Urdu Hindi tradition and the Baul tradition, if she's covered that?
Yes, I have pointed out that we do not have any evidence that Tagore ever has any access to Rumi. Even the books preserved in the Rabindra Bhavan archive, which were personally used by Tagore, there were scribbling in the margin, etc. We do not get any book on Rumi that I have mentioned. But the point is that this affinity with Rumi, even if they do not have any direct contact, may be inspired by some sort of philosophical affinity between the two. Rumi, I have mentioned, you must have followed that Rumi very peculiarly resonates our Upanishads, with which he is not supposed, he had no contact at all. But even then, his poems resonate, in many cases, resonate our Upanishadic thought. The same, the one thou, you, the absolute identity, Vedantic thoughts come resonating in Rumi. In the same token, Rabindranath, though there is no evidence, I cannot substantiate the fact that Rabindranath, as he was acquainted with Hafiz, he wrote on Hafiz, he was exasperated, he was enumerated when he visited Hafiz. But whether he had read Rumi, there is no evidence to it. But at the same time, this philosophical concept, which is similar in both Rumi and Rabindranath, and at the same time triggered by Sufism and Baul thoughts, that must be a reason, reason before this strange affinity in the works of these two.
Yeah, I just want to add, because you see it here, it is Rumi, which just I have bought some months ago, because it is a new translation of Rumi's work, and well, it is called From All and the One. So you see,
is it by Nicholson? Is it edited by Nicholson?
No, by a German editor, Diedrichs.
Oh no, this I have not seen. I have seen other books edited by Nicholson and some other people.
I see. No, this one is a German translation, of course.
Is it in German? The translation is in German.
Oh, it is in German. Yeah. I just bought it.
I know a little German, but that is not enough to read this book.
Yeah, and as my husband is an artist, he's very interested in what Rumi is saying. At the moment, it's too early that he will come here, but I hope you will come to know him today. So that's what I wanted to say. Yes, of course, one can say still very much more, because there is, you have the tradition to accept your tradition, to enter into it and to say, yes, I am near of all this and I will work with them, and to avow it, to say so. In perhaps in Europe or the whole, they don't dare to say, I go back to mysticism, because the situation is so different. The political and the economic, social, and so on situation is so different that they don't accept anymore this going back. And at the moment when Tagore received his Nobel Prize, that was like a desire of Europe to be like him and to be with your tradition. But unfortunately, it was just a moment.
Yes,
Then it was
that did not last for long. After the
No.
publication of Gardener, it was eroding.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
Can you
well,
hear me, ma'am?
so,
Can you hear me, ma'am?
you can
Just-
be heard. Please be quick and brief because we are overrunning the time.
Yeah, I have just a little observation, and I just want to say a few words. First of all,
Unmute করে
Please
দিন।
unmute yourself.
Unmute,
You have muted yourself. Please unmute yourself. Hey, Tiash, ওকে unmute করে দে যদি পারিস।
Yellow.
She's muted herself. Oh, she's muted herself from her side. So we can't unmute herself from our side. And I'm afraid that it's 1 hour and 2 minutes since we started, which was already, and we started 3 or 4 minutes after time. So we do have the parallel sessions coming up. And with some regret, because I felt this was a paper that we could discuss more on, but I would like to thank Tapotidi once again for illuminating a corner of Rabindranath and of course Rumi that not too many of us had much of an understanding of in the past. So thank you. A round of virtual applause for Tapotiti. And we will end this session now.
Thank you all for giving me a patient hearing.
Okay, Tiash, take over.
Thank you, sir. So we are moving to our next session by Dr. Amit Ranjan. Professor Chandra Mohan will chair this session. Professor Chandra Mohan is the General Secretary, Comparative Literature Association of India. He is the chair ICLA, Standing Research Committee for South Asian Literatures and Cultures. He has taught English and comparative literature at the universities of Delhi, Calgary and Miami International. He is the recipient of Fulbright Senior Fellowship, Siki Fellowship in Canadian Studies and Global Goodwill Ambassador Award. I request Professor Chandra Mohan to chair this session and take over from now on. Thank you. Sir,
Yes. Dr. Amit Ranjan, are you here?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Ranjan,
Yes, sir.
can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So I'm glad to start the proceedings of this session. And Amit Ranjan, first I tell you about his scholarship and the position which he holds. Amit has a PhD and MPhil, both from JNU. His doctoral research about John Lang, a 19th century Australian writer, lawyer, and journalist, engages with rich primary archival material, and it throws a new light at mid 19th century British Empire vis-a-vis characters of interloper like Lang. Amit will be again a Fulbright scholar in residence at Florida International University later this year. He was Fulbrighter earlier also in 2019 and 2015 at the same university. He has also been a recipient of Endeavour Fellowship of Australia and also the INLAC Research Grant, courtesy of which he was a visiting fellow at UNSW Sydney. He was also delegate at Australian Indian Youth Dialogue and had the position of Australian Awards Ambassador. He has taught literature at institutions like St. Stephen's, Miranda House, GNU, and Jamia Millia Islamia and FIU. Now, in addition to this, Amit has a creative personality. His poems, short stories, research essays, and all that have found place in reputed journals, and at the same time, his other poems, which I can, the titles which I can just mention are "I Am Also Thirsty," "Me, Leonard Cohen," and upcoming publications include John Lang, non-fiction work on Dara Chico, which is more important because he is doing a project on Dara Chico, which is going to be soon published by a reputed publishing company. So that we'll discuss later on. But I'm really happy that Amit is here. And when Alan told me that Amit is here, rather he told Amit, then I was surprised to know that I came to know that Amit has claims that I was his teacher at JNU when I taught Indian studies in one full term. So I'm very happy that Amit has risen so high in this few years, and I wish him all the best. And with these words, I invite Amit to read his or present his paper on Dara Chico. Amit, most
Thank you very much, sir, and thank you, CLAI, for inviting me for this talk. And like sir pointed out, I was very delighted to learn that Professor Chandra Mohan gave me a call, and we have very fond memories of him teaching us in JNU a decade ago and more. Without wasting any time, I'll start with the presentation. I have a PowerPoint also, so I'll try to.
NON, non.
So this talk today is about Dara Shikoh, the crown prince who was the eldest son of Shah Jahan and elder brother of Aurangzeb. And it's titled Dara Shikwa, Guns Over Roses, Politics Over Poetry. So the title is a little provocative in the sense that it is posited in a moment of his life, which I'm going to concentrate much more on that, on his intellectual history, rather than just talking about the period of life which he's most talked about for, which is the battle with Aurangzeb in 1658 and 1659. So basically, both the brothers are sort of caught in this moment of history, in this what-if moment of history, which is in historical parlance called the counterfactual moment. And so we do not really get into the real journey of Dara Shikoh, his intellectual journey, which is what I'd like to concentrate here in this presentation on. So very quickly, a few points about what we know about Dara's history. We do not know much about his early years, except that he was held hostage by Jahangir. It's a time-honored tradition in amongst the Mughals of sons rebelling against father. And so when Shah Jahan rebelled against Jahangir, Dara was held hostage. And we do not know much more about his early years. We know a little about his education, etc., which I'm not going into. But the moment that we are talking about is the Battle of Samugarh in Agra and later in Ajmer. So he lost both battles and the subsequent beheading in 1659 when Dara was betrayed by Malik Jivan. Now, here there are certain points I'd like to make. A lot is made about Aurangzeb's superior military prowess and Dara's inferior one, and that Dara was a poet and so he could not fight, etc., etc. And so the victory of Aurangzeb was ordained, etc. And that is the general historical narrative that is constructed around these battles. The second battle, of course, he was much defeated, but the first battle we must understand is that Aurangzeb was up against Shah Jahan's army, not against Dara's army. Shah Jahan was ill, and so Dara was fighting on his behalf. And so Aurangzeb was fighting against the Emperor of India, and so it's not an easy battle for Aurangzeb either. So to dismiss it and say that Dara was a weaker military general is doing discredit to that entire history. And if one goes through Storia di Mogor of Nicolai Manucci or several other contemporary accounts, we learn that it was because the military generals of Shah Jahan as well as the ulema deserted him on the battlefield. The chief amongst them was Khalilullah Khan and several others. And there were reasons for that, because Dara was, in Shakespearean terms, his tragic flaw was that he was outspoken, overconfident, he did not heed counsel. And so his nemesis was his company, was his ideas, and which I'll come to in the next 2 points, which you can see as Sarmad and Unit Primavera. So the ulema were scandalized that if a person like Sarmad became the prime minister of Dara's court. Sarmad was a gay and nude fakir who was the closest to Dara at this point of time, and he would probably become the chief minister, so to say. And so this battle was lost not due to Dara's inferior military prowess, but due to other reasons, which I'll go on to explain. Now, a little word about Sarmad is important over here, which will also tell about the political makeup of this time and the social makeup and the kind of eclectic atmosphere, eclectic worldview, and the kind of courtiers that were there at that point in Delhi. So Sarmad was this Armenian Jew from Kashan, Iran. He was a jeweler. He came to the port of Thatta, where he attended some Sufi gatherings. He went and listened to Qawwalis, where he fell in love with this boy called Abhay. So Sarmad is about 35 at this point of time, and the age of Abhay is around 17 or 18. And he falls in love with him, and the two start living together. And there's a sort of a minor scandal at this point of time, wherein Abhay's father takes him home. And then Sarmad goes to his house and tells his father that I am the wealthiest jeweler of Kashan, and here are all my jewels. And after that, he disrobes himself, and then he says that I have nothing left. I don't have my jewels, I don't have my clothes. What I have in the world is Abhay. And so Abhay's father is so moved by this that he hands over his son and says that only you would be able to take care of my son. So this is unimaginable even in the context of today, or more so in the context of today. But this tells about the kind of worldview that existed in mid 17th century in India, in Delhi and in Lahore and the area of Sindh. This was acceptable. And thereafter, Sarmad and Abhay go on to tour all of India with Abhay Sarmad composing poems and Abhay dancing and singing to it. The other interesting character over here is eunuch Primavera, as mentioned by Nikolai Manucci, so who's otherwise mentioned by Tavernier as Basant Mewati. So a eunuch in the service of Dara Shikoh, who was a military general and held the fort of Bhakkar, while Bhakkar was a fort on the Indus River. And while this battle raged on with Aurangzeb, and Basant held on to the fort as long as Dara was alive. In fact, when Dara surrendered and wrote a letter to Basant to surrender. And he in fact defeated Khalilullah Khan, the general that I've just mentioned, who deserted Dara to switch sides. And so this was the sort of makeup of his courtiers, where there was Sarmad, where there was Primavera, there was Father Buzi, a Jesuit saint from Spain, and it's also conjectured that Dara converted to Christianity in his last time, which is pretty much untrue. It's just because of his closeness with Father Buzi that this is conjectured. So there have been attempts at various kinds of appropriation of both Sarmad and Dara. Now, after Dara was killed in 1659 in jail, Aurangzeb was after Sarmad. And it was not easy to kill Sarmad. Aurangzeb understood he had such a massive following. And even when Dara was brought in chains to Delhi, there was a sort of a revolt in which the citizens, along with some soldiers, killed a few soldiers of Malik Jivan, the man who had betrayed Dara and brought him to Delhi. And so it was not easy to kill Sarmad. So a charge of apostasy had to be framed against him. So Aurangzeb knew well from his advisors that Sarmad never uttered the full kalma. He uttered only La ilaha and went quiet after that. And it's the first tenet of being a Muslim, that you have to utter the full kalma. And so he was summoned and he was asked to utter the kalma, and he, as usual, he just uttered La ilaha and went quiet after that. And so this was the charge of apostasy. He was beheaded, and thereafter is a series of legends that take over, because Aurangzeb had banned any writing about Dara or Sarmad during his lifetime. And so Sarmad enters the oral tradition, and there's this imagery of him holding his head in his hand and climbing up the stairs of Jama Masjid with blood sprouting from his neck, very much like the imagery of Chinnamastika, and which also shows how the imagery is also syncretic in nature in this tradition. And so then his guru, his peer, Hare Bhare Shah, whose grave was next to Jama Masjid, called him and said that his complaint has been registered, and so now he should come and lie next to him. And so it's a very interesting shrine which is half green, half red. Green for Hare Bhare Shah and red for Sarmad's blood. And it's very interesting that this shrine is visited by LGBTQ people, transgender people, and not from now, for centuries. And it's one of the most open shrines without any rules which one finds in other places. So that is the kind of surroundings in which Dara was at this point of time. Here are a few pictures quickly before we get on with his intellectual engagement. This also goes on to show how famous the Mughal Empire was in Europe and how engaged the artists of Europe were. This is Dara and Shah Jahan as painted by, sketched by Rembrandt. And at this point of time, you also see Dryden having written Aurangzeb, his play. These are Dara's nuptials, and it is said that 30 lakh rupees was spent. And so in a way, Shah Jahan declared very early on that Dara was his crown prince. So primogeniture was not a rule amongst the Mughals, and there was bloody battle of succession pretty much in every generation, but Shah Jahan made it quite clear pretty early on to Aurangzeb's chagrin and to the other brothers as well. And this would also lead to the battles in 1658. This is a very interesting picture, and this is a series of 20 or 30 pictures. And this is Dara shooting Nilgai, and so this picture sort of describes the formation, the triangular formation, how they hunted Nilgais, etc. And so there are many pictures of this kind of hunting, etc. And so this is just to show that um, the mainstream narrative about Dara is that of a poet who had no interest or no training in military crafts, which is otherwise discredited by sources like this, which tell that the training of the brothers was similar in terms of military understanding. Now, Dara is caught in a moment of what if, as is Aurangzeb. What would have happened if Dara would have won the war and Aurangzeb had lost? And so this counterfactual historical moment is sort of stuck in our historical imagination, much like partition or anything else, and which reduces sort of the stature of both Aurangzeb and Dara Shikoh. Where they're reduced to good Muslim, bad Muslim, or bigot and a pious person or a poet. And it's very interesting that Dara in his own time was the bad Muslim, and how that perception has changed with time. But the point that I'm trying to raise over here is, does counterfactual history prefer militarism in a king? Which is to say, that is military history more important to historiography than a cultural history. So to contextualize this point, I'd like to talk about Audrey Truschke's book Aurangzeb, which is quite celebrated, which came out a few years ago. Now, in augmenting Aurangzeb, she sort of downsizes Dara and falls into the same trap, while she invokes that the Dara Aurangzeb binary has to be broken and Aurangzeb has to be seen for what he is. And she contextualizes Aurangzeb's position that as a political leader, to survive, he had to kill his brothers, he had to imprison his father, and he had to destroy Dara Shikoh's legacy, as well as he had to be the pious Muslim that he posed to be, though he probably was not, to please his ulema. And at the same time, she also contextualizes his political context, saying that the number of Marathas in Aurangzeb's court is much more than in anybody else's court in the Mughal Empire, and which goes on to sort of show that it was Aurangzeb's political contingencies that made him do what he did, rather than a sort of religious underpinning or fervor which he operated upon, which is all very good. However, in doing so, she cuts Dara short, and which is where the problem of historiography arises, or the way we look at sources. So I'll give a few examples. So, for example, she talks about Shah Jahan having a stomach disease, so because of which he was ill, and there was a rumor that he's died, or Dara has taken over the throne in Agra, and so on and so forth. Whereupon Aurangzeb marched to Samugarh. So she quotes Nikolai Manucci, the same person that I just talked about, who's written Pepys of the Mughal Empire and Storia di Mughal, Story of the Mughals, where Manucci says that Shah Jahan was too sexually active for a man of 55, and which caused him venereal diseases. So Truschke sort of dismisses that, saying that Nikolai Manucci is not a good source, that he's not a credible source, that he's a soldier who's written his memoirs, and he's prone to this kind of misinformation or exaggeration or gossip, etc. On the other hand, while she's talking about Dara Shikoh in prison, she quotes the same Nikolai Manucci, where Dara is asked what would he have done if he won the battle, and Dara says, well, I would have quartered Aurangzeb. And this Audrey takes as an example of Dara's cruelty. That Dara is no different from Aurangzeb. That he, in the heart of his hearts, is also as cruel as Aurangzeb is. So here are 2 points. A, Manuji from an incredible source becomes a credible source. And secondly, even if he's a credible source, a desperate man in jail who's lost his wife, his son, his grandchildren, if he says that he would want to kill Aurangzeb, I don't see there's much of a demonstration of his general personality in that. At one point, Audrey Tushki says that Dara's defeat was certain because he was not an able military general. He was too much of a dreamy man. On the other hand, when she talks about the Battle of Lucknow with Murad, she says Dara had turned Lucknow, the Gomati River, into a pool of blood. And so there's this back and forth, a discomfort, and a deliberate downsizing of the figure of Dara Shikoh to sort of augment Aurangzeb. And so the problem of binary always remains in history. And another important matter in this is looking at Dara Shikoh as this dreamy poet who does not have interest in military warfare, and looking at him as a freak of history is also doing a great disservice to the entire Mughal history, which I've referred to Infantilizing Baba Dara by Rajiv Kindra over here, because there's a whole legacy of engagement with the Chishti order as well as other orders throughout the Mughal Empire. We know very well that it was with the blessings of Salim Chishti that Jahangir was born. That Jahangir himself was very close to Saint Aurangzeb himself is buried in the courtyard of where the Sufi saint is buried. And of course, there's the long legacy of Akbar, which Dara is taking forward. Akbar is the great grandfather. That Akbar started Dini Ilahi, Sulehkul, and Akbar started several practices like starting his own calendar instead of following the Hijri calendar. People being buried facing the east, not the west, and so on and so forth. And he also had an Ibadat Khana, which was an interfaith dialogue, and all of that. So Dara is very well aware of this legacy, and he's taking it forward. And at the same time, so it's very important to contextualize him in the whole canon of the great Mughals, and not see him as a separate entity who was in the Qadri silsila and who was flirting with Sufism, etc. Now, just last one point about Audrey Tushki's book. This is a picture of Dara Shikoh, miniature painting, and this is the cover of Aurangzeb, Audrey Tushki's book cover, where she uses this picture to talk about Aurangzeb's physical features like his aquiline nose, olive complexion, dark beard, etc., etc. As you can see, there's not much difference between these two miniatures. And the miniature tradition is not a tradition of portrait making. It's not a tradition of verisimilitude. It's only a symbolist tradition. And so here again, the lapses that one can make even while dealing with primary sources. Now let's get to Dara's intellectual journey in detail. His first encounter with the Upanishads was in Kashmir in 1640 as a young man of 25 when Shah Jahan took him over there, and he was delighted at receiving the Upanishads, and then he spent the next 13-14 years reading these Upanishads. So they were about 100 in number, and eventually he translated between 50 and 56. The number varies in different accounts. And so early on, at the age of 25, he discovers the Upanishads, and at the same time he has deep interest in other religions. So he often has conferences with Baba Lal, Father Buzi, the Jesuit saint already mentioned, Sarmad already mentioned, Guru Har Rai.
We are making efforts in India Islamic tradition to give him a desired status. I remember when I was advisor in Jammu University, we had created a wonderful center, research center on Dara Shikoh. It is visited by all the people, and when you are free, you can also visit that. There is a lot of treasure of old rubrics which are lying there. So, with these words, I thank Ranjan, and also I thank all the participants, particularly our two foreign participants, Cyril Bogomil and Stephen from Cyprus. They have encouraged us, but this is the advantage of having a webinar conference. So we are feeling indemnified by that. Thanks again to everybody. Now you are
Thank you so
having
much.
a tea break.
Thanks.
And after that, we meet again at 11:30 sessions.
Thanks so much for listening and for the engaging questions and the discussion. Thank you so much.
Can I ask just to have a good time? It is 11:30, and now you are at what time are you at the moment?
11. It is 11:10.
11:10.
10.
11:10.
20
So
minutes.
we have 20 minutes tea break. You can
Yes.
also enjoy your breakfast.
Yes, exactly. I will try to. So in half an hour or so,
Yes, then we will do it.
a little
Okay.
bit after 11:30. Okay.
Over to Rindan. Over to Rindan. Rindan, do you have any instruction to give us?
No, sir.
So we meet at 11:30?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we'll meet at 11:30, Chandramohanji.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is Kunal still there? I want to say hello.
Yes. No, they are actually, this is in Delhi, schools have opened.
Oh.
And both the children have gone. So you will meet them after your lecture in the evening.
Yes, okay. That's fine.
Just a clarification, Chandramohan ji, are we meeting at this link or the other link at 11:30?
And this is Kundu. Would you tell me? This is perhaps the other link.
No.
Please tell us.
Rindan, this link or the other link at 11:30?
Sir, from 11:30 there will be two sessions. So one session, the session ends with A. We will meet in this through this link. Session ending with B. There is another link created which you can find on the conference program.